Hello vinyl community, this is Tommy in North Carolina, and I'm going to do a video that's sort of maybe a slight answer to a video made by another vinyl community member, Sean Zlock. I believe I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and if I'm not, I do apologize. But I'll link his channel down here below, and he's a good friend of Jeff Party. It's another channel that I enjoy quite a bit. But in his video, he talked about some forbidden records when he was a kid. And this is not really necessarily forbidden records, and it was kind of strange because there were some shared experiences there, particularly with a Kiss album. But this is more about records that I kind of alluded to in a previous video where I talked about some recent finds, and going back to this Lionel Richie Can't Slow Down, where I mentioned in that video that this was an album that my mother bought when she joined the Columbia House Record Club, the thing where you sent the penny in, you taped it, and you sent in, and you checked off, 8 tapes or 10 or 11. I can't remember how many tapes you got, but this was one of the cassettes that she got from that record service, and it was in sort of heavy rotation in the car. So these are going to be records that I sort of remember as a youth growing up, records that I was quite fond of, or that kind of was ingrained in me because we listened to it in the car, and it was sort of common records. And of that stack of cassettes that she got that just kind of stayed in the car forever, my mom wasn't a record collector or anything, so she didn't have a ton of music lying around. But I was just going to share with you guys some of those records. Now, to put things in perspective, I was born in 1975. And so some of my earliest memories are late 70s, early 80s. Of course, this album falls into that, and quite a few of these are going to fall in that time frame. So another one, and it's a record I'm really quite fond of, that was also in that stack of cassettes that was in heavy rotation in the car, is the Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, the Night Moves record, which is a pretty classic Bob Seger record. Kind of several hits on here, the title track. But Rock and Roll Never Forgets, and several. This is a really good one. This is the Double Wally pressing, which I'm really happy to have, so it's got a good quality to it. Yeah, this album has quite a few big hits, that Main Street and everything. But in addition to those songs, I remember hearing some of the songs like Come to Papa on episodes of Miami Vice when I was a kid. I hardly could comprehend everything that was going on in that show, but a lot of that music, that rock music, was kind of formed the soundtrack of that, and so that's one of them. Here's an older album. It's actually out of my dad's record collection, the Beatles' Hey Jude album. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize that this was a later compilation, or a compilation that came out in '68 that had featured an interesting hodgepodge of Beatles songs. It came, it had songs like I Should Have Known Better and Paperback Writer and stuff like that, but it had songs like Hey Jude and Revolution. So it was weird. A record that opened with I Should Have Known Better and had, Revolution on it was just kind of a strange thing. But it's probably maybe one of the last sort of weird American Beatle albums to feature just, whatever tracks were around. But in addition to that, this record probably introduced me to the Beatles. John Lennon, when John Lennon was murdered, I was really too young to comprehend, but I knew who he was, and I knew that he had been killed. But Paul McCartney was still a pretty regular visitor to Top 40 radio, and particularly in the early 80s. The collaborations with Michael Jackson and his own solo stuff. Paul was very relevant in the early 80s as sort of someone you were familiar with on the radio. So I remember listening to this and seeing the Lennon-McCartney song credits on the label, and I remember trying to pick out which one was singing, if it was John or Paul. And I didn't really know a whole lot about the Beatles, and no one really had told me, but I just enjoyed the music on this record, and I enjoyed the songs, and still do. But, it's kind of funny now knowing the history of where it sat, and it's one of the few Beatles albums my dad actually had in his collection. So, that's just one of those interesting ones. Another one also out of my dad's collection that I listened to quite a bit, and this was a very popular album, The Outlaws. This was a compilation, I think it came out around 76, featuring Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jessie Coulter, who was Waylon's wife, and Tom Paul Glaser. And they were, kind of capitalizing on the outlaw movement in country music, and these guys were labeled the Outlaws. But I love the cover. But songs like Good Hearted Woman and things like that on there, Willie Nelson doing Me and Paul, but Waylon singing Suspicious Minds, it kind of introduced me to what type of country music that I liked and enjoyed and grew up listening to, because my dad enjoyed this kind of stuff. So I'm forever linked to this album thanks to the memory of my dad, and it's just one that I remember just as a good memory growing up. Like I said, for fans of country music, this was a big deal, because it was, these guys were really pushing the limits of what was happening in the Nashville country music scene, and these guys were sort of roughnecks. But Willie Nelson was a huge success, of course Waylon as well. But that was a big hit compilation. So this one is one of the cassettes I think was in that stack too. Tina Turner, Private Dancer. I didn't realize at the time that Tina was experiencing a bit of a comeback around this period, and that What's Love Got to Do with It was a big radio hit, the music video and everything. And I didn't know there was a history with Tina that went back to the 60s and, the Ike and Tina thing. I was completely unaware of that. But, songs on this album like Private Dancer and Better Be Good to Me, all of those songs, I remember very well, and I remember, my mom having this cassette, and it was a big thing to have. And finally, one more, and this was kind of more of my own, was Cyndi Lauper, She's So Unusual. This was an album that I remember just sort of falling in love with when I was a kid. And I think probably I had a bit of a crush on Cyndi. But Cyndi was, a big deal in the early 80s. I definitely preferred Cyndi to Madonna, who was also kind of a big female artist coming out at the time. But the song All Through the Night, I had the 45 for it, and that really kind of led me down the rest of it. This album had quite a few hits. Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Money Changes Everything, She Bop, Time After Time, and All Through the Night. And of course that's what's touted on the hype sticker there. But also stuff like When You Were Mine, which is a Prince song, and some really, really good album cuts on here that are equally good. This is just a fun pop, sort of post new wave, if that's a real thing, kind of record. And Cyndi just, I enjoyed her unusual voice. And just everything about this record, just the style of this album. And it's one of the first ones I remember just listening to all the way through, and it was one of the ones that was my own. Now, being younger, I did have Kiss records and things like that, and I certainly was aware of music, and I had quite a few 45s, and it's funny, I think about some of the 45s that I was into, and my mom let me buy, but stuff like George Benson, Give Me the Night, I had, Blondie, some interesting stuff for a 4-year-old to sort of be drawn to. Cars by Gary Newman, I remember having that 45 as a kid. And so that's kind of interesting, and how those songs kind of were there and kind of form a lot of my early musical thoughts and education. But anyway, these are some of the ones that as a young guy that maybe kind of helped mold or something. I don't know, because my musical taste definitely branched out quite a bit from there, so that certainly wasn't the basis for everything I listened to, but I have fond memories of those albums, and it connects me to my parents and things like that, so all of those records kind of have special places for me. and I still enjoy them for what they are. And so that's my little collection of records of childhood memories, as it were. And comment below. I want to thank everybody that's been interacting, and thanks to those that have engaged with my previous video, the question. There's a lot of good insight happening there, and I really do appreciate it. And again, let me know if there's anything you'd like maybe for me to talk about, and I try to interact with as many of you as you can. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It's TommyBurton75. I usually show what I'm spinning on there, which is pretty cool. But in the meantime, I'll see you guys next time, and happy listening.